Hello, and welcome to the University of West Florida Criminal Justice Society Book Club meeting. Today we're discussing Ted Conover's book, NewJack. What really got this project started was his idea to contact the Department of Corrections in New York State and see if he could shadow a recruit going through the academy, just to kind of get an understanding what it's like to be a correctional officer, to kind of help bridge the gap between corrections and the general population. Which is a good idea. However, New York State didn't agree with that, so they denied him that permission. And I kind of think the reason why is they like that shadowy kind of figure and keeping the public in the dark, not knowing what a correctional officer really has to deal with and how they're trained. Whether that's partly to do with, officer safety, because, possibly future or past inmates might see it and learn some stuff to counteract the system or not. That's kind of really up to them to state their reasoning. But I just kind of think that they like that disconnect between the public and the actual correction system. What's your take on that, guys?
I believe it's a trust issue. I think that, like he was saying, the corrections likes to keep that shadow figure around. I think that they like to keep them in the dark. And one thing I want to touch on is with a shadowy figure, it's a different perspective. So when you go into a prison and you see a guard who is beating up on a prisoner as somebody who stands outside of the corrections society, you would see that as almost abuse. Okay, but when you're part of corrections, you understand that guard has probably been going through a lot, the stress that job takes to maintain those prisoners day in and day out, having to fight the keep locks to get back in the cell, and just that stress, and that prisoner could have just attacked one of his fellow officers. So I believe if somebody was to shadow a correctional officer, I think that what he showed society later on would be would be almost a false outlook on what the corrections life truly is.
And for those of you that aren't aware what a keep lock is basically somebody that's restricted to like a solitary confinement. And in this case, the book takes place in Sing Sing prison in New York. And there, they didn't have enough space in their solitary confinement. So what they do is they keep people in their normal cells, and they just lock them up there for 23 hours, essentially a day, just due to lack of space. So that's what a keep lock is, in case you weren't aware.
Okay. David was saying, there's this trust there between people who work in the correctional system and the outside world. In the beginning of the book, Conover discusses meeting with a representative from the academy, and the representative actually wanted to open up a conversation because he did feel that not a lot of people knew what was going inside the correctional systems, and he wanted to open Conover's eyes and basically other people's by telling his story and the academy's story by letting Conover get in touch with some of the sources that he was willing to give to Conover. But at the same time, after a few months of meeting him, he actually did not return his contact and his responses with Conover. So,
I thought
my take on it.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say that my take on it was that in the beginning of the book, it discusses that Conover was a journalist, correct?
Yes.
Journalists are notorious for leaking information, which is, like everyone discussed, that it was a part of keeping that privacy within a correctional facility. That's why they go through the strenuous training that they go through to see if they can weed out, just as he suggested in the book, the ones who don't really belong. And he conformed his mind to fit theirs so that he could get as much information as he could from within the system.
Okay. But going back to what Christine was saying, I thought he was talking to a union boss who was really for getting the story out and getting people to understand what basically his cohorts had to do on a day-to-day basis and learn the training process of it. But ultimately, like I said, his permission was denied, so there was a backdoor way for him to get in, which essentially get hired on, and that's what he did. He took the civil service test and was picked up as a correctional officer and went through the academy just like anybody else would. One of the things that I can draw off on, personally, I have some military experience, and what I've learned through that was when you're going through and doing training, they usually tell you kind of the ideal way things are going to run. When you make it out to where you're actually working, they tell you to kind of forget about what you learned. That's not the real way it actually happens. And that's kind of a very similar thing that happened to Conover. And it was just one of the key things that they taught in the academy was that you needed interpersonal skills to deal with the inmates, but they didn't want the students actually having contact with the inmates. They taught, to keep them completely separate, really don't look at them, don't talk to them, and that's a huge contradiction from what they actually have to do in real life, because when they're there, the only way to interact and get the inmates to do what they need them to do is to talk to them. And
then...
Go ahead.
Yes, and I was going to say the same thing with the inmates. In a way, the trainees, which were the correctional officer trainees, they were treated as inmates in the same way, such as he said. They were giving uniforms that were just like everyone else's, similar to how inmates are given uniforms. They were no longer by their name. They were numbers as well. They were treated as inmates in a way.
Very, very true. And that also is somewhat different from the way they're actually treated in the prison, because they actually went by name. They used their last name and first initial on their name tags, but they still had uniforms to identify them as different people compared to the inmates. Did anybody else see any other contradictions between the training academy environment and the actual prison environment?
I think you hit the biggest one. I think it was really just kind of cool how the trainees or the trainers in the academy were telling them not to speak to the prisoner. But then as soon as Conover gets there, I mean, that was one of the first lessons he learned. And he was aghast. He had no idea that, I believe it was Wittership that said that, right? I believe. I remember just reading that Conover, he just felt like he was just, wait, what? Because in the academy, they were told to never speak to the prisoner. That was the first thing you had to learn. But going from factual to more opinionated, I think that sometimes it is nice to talk to the prisoner, because, like you stated, there's no possible way you can get them to do what you want them to do if you don't talk to them, because, first of all, they're not going to trust you. If the prisoner does not trust you, and he knows that you kind of fear him, he's going to take advantage of you. And just like in the book, numerous times, Conover was just taken advantage of. All the porters, even people who actually didn't have a job that day were still trying to say, oh, hey, I'm on yard today, or hey, I'm on gym, or I'm on I have to go take a shower. I mean, you got to build that trust, and I believe you have to talk to them in order to build that trust, and then it'll make both of your guys' jobs easier.
And to kind of elaborate on what Tasia was saying about, I'm trying to remember exactly what she said, but I guess the system during training at the academy is kind of similar to how they would treat prisoners or inmates. The fact that they would give them these uniforms and kind of make them work. I think that, in a way, is set to where COs could understand what inmates have to go through in the prison system, and so they can actually build communication as well, not to just contradict what the reality of it is.
So they can kind of sympathize with the prisoners on a certain level.
I would think that's a very small level by kind of taking away I mean, they all have some sort of individuality as trainees, but the idea that they're all kind of made to look very similar gives them a very small sense, a loss of individuality and kind of humanity. Another thing that I think is a big contradiction between the training environment and the actual working environment they experienced in Sing Sing was rigidity. In the academy, they were set to be a very militaristic style, very similar to a boot camp.
Marching lines, yeah,
and inspections. And he even mentions that one of the fellow trainees, I believe in the class, had prior military experience and was used to kind of the arrangements and everything. Whereas when they got to Sing Sing, it was kind of like a free for all. When they were trying to learn how to do things, they just said, "Here's what you need to do," like get the guys in the cell, and there was no actual training of good best practices of how to get them in the cell or somebody walking them through it. It was just get this done, and that's it. Somebody walked off and waited for them to be accomplished. That's definitely a contradiction from those two environments.
But, yeah, and the way that it was also a contradiction by how they were treated, it could have unconsciously taught the trainees what it was like to be an inmate. So they would know how it would feel. That way they could have more respect for the inmates, showing them that, yeah, they're still humans. And this is what it feels like when you have to do what we say and how hard it is. So it was kind of like inadvertently showing them the same way.
I agree with that to an extent. That might be a side effect of it. I by no means think that was their intention to do that, to kind of get them to feel what it's like to be an inmate. The simple fact that, basically the stories that the officers are telling through training and when actually in the prison, there's a sense that, the prisoners are kind of low-life scum, and that, the guards are superior to them. So with that, it's kind of hard to say, we want you to understand what it's like to be an inmate and realize that loss of humanity. So that is a side effect of it that I can agree with, but I don't think that was an intention by the Department of Corrections to accomplish that.
One of the goals of the Department of Corrections might have been to build a tough exterior, so that whenever a CO has interactions with an inmate, like the story he used of one of the teachers actually building a relationship with one of the inmates and basically going against code, that would deter that from actually happening. So that might have been one intention of the correctional system and that part of the training.
Okay. Later on in the book, Conover pretty much states that they're warehouses of human beings. Anybody have an idea of why he might have said that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Well, the point of correction is to correct. You're supposed to watch after them, and I feel like you guys have stated, I believe most prisoners think of correctional officers think of prisoners as scum. The scum of the earth, people who threw away their life. It was their choice to rob a bank. It was their choice to rape a girl. It was their choice to murder someone. So it's almost like they're not people anymore. Instead of actually getting to know them and correcting them, they pretty much just shuffle these bags of meat around like it's almost essentially a warehouse. It's not like they have any feelings, or they pretty much just move the prisoner from one place to the next, and when they're in their cell, they'll sit and watch. So it is almost essentially just a warehouse, just bags of meat, and you're just supposed to shuffle them around.
Christine, you got any thoughts on that?
That's definitely a good example that the inmates are basically just bodies that are put into a facility, and that they don't account for any humanity as you kind of put out there. But at the same time, I guess these correctional facilities also house different kinds of people. So I can see where the warehouse of humans can kind of be put into a sense where they have to deal with different kinds of people every day on a daily basis and interact with these people. So they have to know how to understand them in order to correct them.
It is, yes, I agree. I just think if it would be easier, it doesn't matter if you have murderers, rapists, sexual offenders, robbers. It doesn't matter. It's very hard in a prison to differentiate all these people when they're all grouped together. So when they're all grouped in with murderers with robbers, and robbers with rapists, they all just kind of clash. And I think at that point it is hard to differentiate them. I think if you were able to differentiate them, I think it'd be a little easier to move away from the ideas of the human warehouse and more to the idea of a correctional facility.
Well, one of the things that they kind of encourage or discourage their employees from doing is actually finding out why people are in jail. They don't really mind you asking the inmate. So there's no guarantee the inmate's going to tell you the actual truth as to why they're in there. I mean, makes mention to an individual,
Twitch,
that said he was in there for murder, and
it was a sexual offender.
It was a sexual offender. He actually researched that to find that out.
Twitch, yeah.
And they don't like you doing that because, you find out that, some 40-year-old individual, per se, raped, for instance, a 10-year-old child. They don't want you to treat that person differently based upon the way that, on their crime, which I think is a good thing. That still gives you some sort of aspect of a humane treatment. I think that's still very small compared to the way they actually treat them in general. But what I would say about it is, through the history of corrections, there's been different focuses on what they want to do. Sometimes it's just incarceration, and moving them away, basically incapacitation where they can't commit another crime while they're in there. Other times it's a just desserts method of you did a crime, you deserve to be punished, this is how we're going to punish you. And earlier, before the 70s, there was kind of a focus on actual rehabilitation, which is really kind of where the term correction officer comes from, because the idea was to correct a deficient behavior. Obviously, you would think that if they're in there, they have a deficiency. They can't abide by society's law for some reason and society's norms. And that's when they were going through trying to alter people's behavior, show them other ways of living, teach them a skill or trade to help them get a job, provide a legitimate means of income. And it just got to the point, there was, some statements made, the research that nothing worked. I mean, people took the headline and ran with it. They didn't read further into the research. They didn't read the subsequent research that said, it wasn't quite the way everybody thought it was. And the big problem was money. It takes more money to try and train somebody to do something differently than just to throw them in a cell and just keep them alive. And that's where it's become a lot of people don't like spending all that money in tax revenue to go to prisons to fund these programs. So they're underfunded, understaffed, and they just kind of essentially, or officially, or in some cases unofficially, done away with. And that's where you really get, to me, the term warehousing of people, because that's all they do. They throw them in a jail cell or in a prison cell and just let them do their time. They don't try and fix the behavior, knowing that eventually they're going to get out, and they're going to have to. They want them to be as contributing members of society, but they've done nothing to change circumstances and behaviors that got them in there in the first place. That's my take. What's your take?
And I agree. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking about, everything you said about the corrections facility. I mean, about what corrections meant. And, society has deterred more away from corrections to, warehousing these human beings, which is pretty much just locking them up. You can look at society today and see how many prisons that they're building. They're building more prisons nowadays than they are educational facilities. And once these people are getting locked up, they're doing other offenses, which gives them more time, such as, in the book, there were inmates who would do, something like gun a correction officer, sling poop on them, and they would write them up and they would get more time, and they were just like, we don't care. I already have enough of these, and they just had that attitude, which is, pretty much makes me think of warehousing, where you're just pretty much storing them and they're staying.
And kind of, touching back on the idea of tax revenue, a lot of folks, that are hardworking tax-paying citizens don't really feel that prisoners should get some of the amenities that they do. It's not really mentioned in here to a certain, whole, degree, but some of the things that they get are educational programs where they can go to the college for free. That's mentioned somewhat. And actually, Conover makes a good statement that, I think a way to kind of bridge that gap and bring people to better understanding is if they offer, because one of the CEOs have a problem with that. And he says that if you offer those same classes to, get a college degree to correctional officers while they're, off duty would be a good step. But they're also offered recreational, time and equipment. They can play sports. They have weightlifting equipment. And there's other recreational items that are offered to them, and a lot of people take offense to that.
I have a very strong opinion towards all that. I strongly believe, the reason why prison is not working in today's society is because people are not afraid to go to prison. That's just life. That's just how it is. Because people can get a high school degree in prison. People have friends. You have free time. You can go out to the yard. You have a gym you can go to. They have programs like Family Protector was a family program where you can meet up with someone. They got a special room where you can mate with your special person. And I don't agree with any of that. I don't think prisons should have any of that because you are a criminal, and the point of prison, rehabilitation doesn't work anymore. It's proven fact. Our prison system today does not use rehabilitation as a method anymore. Now we're just on to incarceration. Okay? And the point of incarceration is just to lock them up, put them away because it's something bad. Now, I do strongly believe in rehabilitating someone. Yes, we can have the educational programs in high school. That's okay. But the fun activities, I believe, have to stop because you went to prison for a reason. You're in prison. You should not be entitled to things other people get outside of prison because you don't. When you're a child and you do something bad, you get put in timeouts. Okay? Doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be watching your favorite show. You could be playing with your favorite toy, and you do something bad. The point of a timeout is to remove you from all of that, give you time to think. You don't have any of that, and you can learn your lesson. But they don't do that in prison. Yes, they take you away from your family, but they still give you a gym. They still give you free time. They still give you TV. They still give you radios. They still give you paper and pencil to draw, which is fine. And books. Books were fine as well. But all the other little mini activities I feel are just are not helping the situation out at all.
I think a lot of people agree with you. I'm sorry, Tej, I got to jump in here. A lot of those free time activities that you disagree with provide a release from the prison life, in a sense, for the prisoners. It also aids with safety and coping. The main punishment of prison is a loss of freedom. You can't go where you want to go, when you want to go. You can't do what you want to do, when you want to do. You're locked in a cell. You have somebody telling you when you're going to get up, when you're going to bed, when you're going to eat. They're dictating what you're going to eat if you decide to eat at all. They pretty much dictate your life. So that right there is a huge punishment. And, you want to keep them humane in a sense, like I mentioned before. Most of these people are getting out. So you don't want them to lose their sense of humanity and be disconnected from society entirely, especially families. That's part of the big problem with crime in general is that fathers are getting arrested and incarcerated, and they're separated from their children for years at a time due to mandatory sentencing laws that are draconian and impose huge, penalties. These children end up growing up without a father. They don't have that father figure to help support them and guide them. And in turn, that mother has to work to support them. They don't have the extra time to focus in on child care and providing a better life for the family. And what that does is allows negative influences to creep in on the children and develop down the road of criminality. So, the family contact program is a good idea. It's a good thing to keep. And also, too, they're coming back out. You want to keep them in touch with their family. If you separate them, it's easier to lose their sense of humanity and harder to rebuild that connection once they get out. And yes, they did a crime that broke society's laws and norms. They need to do some sort of atonement for it. But we need to remember, one day they're coming out, and we want them to be productive. We don't want them going back into the system. Hopefully this just be a one-time thing. All this not only the case, but that's it. We want them to do their time, get out, and don't come back. That should really be the big thing. Is I don't want everyone to see you again. Unless it's out in public and you're doing good and you're not threatening me. I don't want to see you again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I agree with that. No, I definitely see your point of views. Absolutely, and I agree. It is good to keep that sense of humanity because if they lose that, for instance, if they take away that family protective act, they take away that and they got nobody to go. If they have no family to go back to once they get out, they're just going to turn to either old gang members, and they'll just be right back in the system. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's it's a very good opinion.
Tasia or Christine, do you all have anything you want to add to that discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the time within the correctional facility, it's not only is it violent offenders, there's also non-violent offenders such as it may be somebody who wrote too many bad checks or, something as simple as that. And the problem that I see with the criminal justice system is the way the court system is. We're trying to use a universal system to punish people, and there's no two people who are the same. So as far as rehabilitation and corrections, maybe jail doesn't work for everybody. Maybe the rehabilitation they may need is, that job to keep them with finances so that they don't keep writing those bad checks or something. It may be something as simple as that. And I find that a problem within the criminal justice system. Maybe if we lean more towards, rehabilitation than corrections, then it would be less inmates.
I agree, and like you said, one thing I learned, I gotta add this, one thing I learned in Smith-Lazetta class, Punishment Society, is, like you said, most people, there's a lot of drug offenders in prison nowadays. They make up the majority of the population in prison, and it could be just simply, there's a lot of people in prison who almost in a sense don't deserve to be there. One thing Dr. Smith pointed out in his Punishment Society classes, a lot of people who get out, they end their sentence, and they get out, most go back in because of a technical violation. And that could be just like breaking probation or something like that. So I think part of the reason why there's so many people incarcerated is because of the technical violations, but that's kind of getting up.
Not entirely. With all those people, coming back, and as you mentioned, a lot of the prison population being in there for drug-related offenses, that could be simple possession of some marijuana.
And it could be the three-strike rule.
Some of it is, trafficking, some of it's stealing. But a lot of these people are non-violent offenders, and a lot of researchers are really suggesting to move away from incarceration as the general method of punishment, and you only use that for severe cases and violent offenders. Some of the things they're suggesting, day fines, rehab programs, the drug courts. They're talking about just kind of like a halfway house type thing. Other methods of punishment to show them, hey, what you're doing is wrong. We don't agree with it. It's against our laws. There's a price you have to pay, but not throwing them in jail, or actually in this case, prison for conviction.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. And going along with that, if we could move away from incarceration, because incarceration takes a lot of money. I don't remember the exact figure, but I want to save somewhere between $20,000 to $40,000 a year to warehouse, going back to that term, an offender per year. If we can take fewer allow fewer people into prison and get people out, we can save that money and put that to diversion programs and prevention programs. And, I mean, you're going to spend the money one way or another. Let's spend it in a better way to keep people out of the system and save the taxpayers money. So that's one of the big things, you're going back to the argument of, well, me, I'm a hardworking citizen, and I can't really afford air conditioning. I can't afford cable. Why is so-and-so get it? We should cut that out so we can save money. Well, that's, two arguments. But if you're looking at a fiscal policy, that's what you want to do. You want to spend your money as wisely as possible, and just having everybody go to prison and jail and prison for whatever punishment is not the way to save money.
I agree. And this kind of goes off topic a little bit, but there's a part in the book that I absolutely loved, and it was strictly because Conover ended up talking to a prisoner, and that prisoner was named Larson. Okay, Larson was this swarthy little black guy who, when he came into prison, he was illiterate. He didn't know really how to read and write, and he kind of talks about where money should be allocated, correct. And there's a part where he says the money should be put back into the poor neighborhoods, back into the education for children, to change the things that send people here. And then he goes on to discuss about how anyone planning a prison they're not going to build for 10 or 15 years is planning for a child, planning prison for somebody who's a child right now. So you see, they've already given up on that child. They already expect that child to fail. You heard? Now why? If you could keep that from happening, if you could send that child to a good school and help his family stay together, if you could do that, why are you spending that money to put him in jail? And I really, really loved that, because they are focusing, and almost in a sense is already sentencing a child to prison in a sense where they could just, like you said, put it into programs, put it back into the neighborhoods and schools. We need to focus on, I took a class, and the class was taught by Professor Snyder, and it was crime prevention. And that was a great class that we actually learned all these different crime prevention programs that would actually stop them from going to prison. And that's just kind of what you had said about putting more money into all these programs. I feel like that would help relieve a lot of the population from prison. And but that was just a wonderful paragraph that I loved out of the book.
And that's great. Reiterating that, Larson was saying that eventually, basically, the money's being spent already on incarceration. And it's a known fact that it's cheaper to prevent than it is to treat. Whether that's medicine or corrections, that statement holds true. We can spend less money preventing or minimizing crime than to punish crime.
Yes.
And which means more taxpayers' money for keeping taxes the same can be spent in other programs, or it can be given back to the people and they can have more money in their pocket.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
You have less people in prison and you have more money in your pocket.
Anybody have anything else they want to talk about that topic, or?
I basically agree with everything that's been discussed here, as far as the money kind of being put into the correctional systems, but in other ways. Because I do see where there are a lot of issues within the way that inmates have been processed into the system, and it's just the decision-making process between government officials that's kind of been the issue when there's butting heads in the system.
One of the things I thought was kind of interesting was to talk about some of the way the prisoners were treated, basically treating each other and treated by the correctional officers. One of the things that Conover mentions, and he's routinely asked by people who haven't even read the book, and others as well, is, was there any prison rape? And he pretty much tells you that it's not very common, that it's usually, consensual. So that was an interesting aspect. But the other part was just kind of some of the violence acted upon the inmates. And the other thing is, not everybody in prison is really honestly guilty. Most of them will tell you they're not guilty. The facts will state otherwise. But they still show that there's a good portion of people that are truly innocent. Case in point, another book we read not too long ago was Life After Death by Damien Eccles. And in there, Eccles talks about getting beat nearly to death on a couple occasions, and other prisoners getting severely beaten by guards. There's cases of this mentioned in Conover's book, more so on a more legitimate use of force is what is termed, when they're trying to do some cell extractions, they're having problems there. But, the violence initiated by correctional officers on inmates is ridiculous. If it's not needed, it shouldn't be done. We shouldn't be in there beating up prisoners because they killed somebody or they did some horrible act. If it needs to be for officer safety, when they're resisting, or to protect other prisoners, because that's one of the things. The officers are, charged with the safety of the inmates. And if you're having an inmate attack another inmate, which I talked about in there, then sometimes you have to resort to violence. They mentioned about going through the yard, the recreation facility area, and discovering different types of shanks and other, weapons, zip guns. And, you need to remove those out to keep the prisoners safe. Violence criminals typically will beget more violence, and if we can reduce that to where it's only necessary, I think also helps when the people get out, because they're not as corrupt and kind of becoming meaner individuals once they're released.
Another big issue that is talked in chapter 4, when they're in the psych unit, I think is when some of the COs actually don't log in incidents, like the situation with Massey, the inmate who refused to get inside his cell. One of the prison guards or COs actually told Conover not to report the incident because it was a waste of time. And I disagree with that to an extent, because if you kind of pass that along as nothing, it could be something that can be a bigger issue within a correctional facility.
And, piggybacking off of that, it's all about records. And if you can show kind of like habitual behavior, whether it's been part of an officer, which, they try to protect, or, an inmate, it makes things a little bit easier as far as when punishments have to be dealt out, whether it's to an inmate or a correctional officer for abuse of authority. And there's a couple of times in the book where Conover mentions that he would read the logs, and there's a couple of shifts where there's barely anything logged in, and they're supposed to log in like the porters when they were leaving, the keep logs, and that was one of the big things with training and communication that was lacking in the actual prison. A lot of officers or correctional officers weren't very willing to properly train or pass on information to their reliefs and the new recruits about what was going on, and that can cause chaos. It can cause safety violations and issues. When they talk about one time letting a keep lock out, they weren't supposed to. I think because it wasn't written down. And
are you talking about the incident where he had decked an officer's friend and no one logged it? So Conover was told not to let him out of his cell, and he had no idea why. And he learned later on that that prisoner had hit his coworker's friend, and so his coworker's friend was just holding a grudge, and that's just kind of like Conover did what he was told, but he had no idea why he was doing it. And it caused chaos because he didn't know what to do. The inmate was screaming at him. The inmate's friend was telling him out, and I agree, logging it helps.
That, and the other thing,
and when y'all...
Go ahead, Tasia, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and when y'all were speaking of punishment, one of the things I thought about is the use of the death penalty. So when they were executing prisoners, there was times when the execution failed and it was like drastic. So do you think that since those executions failed, do you think it was right to punish them again by increasing the power or putting them right back under? Do you think that's fair, or do you think that one punishment was enough?
The earlier days of the electric chair, I don't really know. I haven't thought about that too much.
So are you asking us if we...
I think she's really asking...
What are y'all opinions of the death penalty?
My opinions on the death penalty, I'm not against it, but I don't really think that it shows it. The point of a death penalty is because they've done something horrific, you put them down for it. But if they kill 30 people and then we turn around and kill them, I mean, it's just not really showing. You're not really learning a lesson. It's a kill for a kill. There's really no. How you learn from that?
A couple things I would want to say is, one, murder is murder, whether it's state sanctioned or not.
I agree. Yes.
The state should not be allowed to say, this person committed a crime, so we're going to take your life. I do believe in them saying some excuses are justifiable, in times of war, when you're actually, fighting nations or whatever, or even self-defense killings, I believe can justify, but I don't think the state should be able to sanction the death of an individual. One, because that is the ultimate punishment. And let's just say that the person executed really, really, really was guilty. They were convicted and they were sent, but it's not like nobody's ever been released because of false testimony or, DNA evidence supporting that they weren't, the actual offender. And once you take that innocent person's life, you can't give it back. The other thing, too, is the cost of such a case is astronomical. It's much cheaper to throw them in prison for life.
It's millions of dollars. I think someone had told me the figure, but it's somebody said it was like $20 million for one death. I could be wrong, but it's up there. It's extremely high, and it's a lot. Like you had stated earlier, 1 year of incarceration is $20,000 to $40,000, but it's in the millions for the death penalty. That's just unreal.
There's definitely an issue of morality when it comes to who's officiating the penalty.
Correct. Yeah. Whether it's who's to say that who's to say the state has the rights to put that person down?
Well, the other thing too, as Christine was talking about, the person who's performing the execution, he talks about the history of Sing Sing and the execution chamber, and just how the toll it took on the medical physician and the actual executioner. And I believe he says that once the executioner was relieved of his duties for whatever reason it was, I think he was retired, he died shortly thereafterwards. That toll is astronomical that it takes on one's psyche and their spirit, to the sense that it's you're punishing an individual who committed a crime, and at the same time you're punishing an innocent person by making them kill somebody. And that aspect alone, I would say, makes it to where the death penalty is not worth it. Let somebody sit there and suffer until the day they die, or until the time they're proven guilty or innocent, and just kind of, leave it be. But going back to the incident where initially when the chair first came out, where they had to electrocute somebody a couple times, that is disheartening. However, I don't know if I would say if somebody was ordered to die and you try it and it doesn't work, if you just say, okay, we tried, let's just let it go, and, either let the guy go or turn him back into his cell. But I would say from here on out, I am not for the death penalty.
Yeah, I think that, just speaking from that perspective and speaking from like a TV show basis, I feel like death row is considered the safest place in any prison. Okay, most prisoners don't really lash out to any of the guards. They pretty much stay to themselves. It's all super quiet. But I couldn't physically imagine walking to the electric chair the first time, let alone the second time. I mean, just the thought of saying goodbye to all your friends, having that long, treacherous walk to the electric chair, sitting down, having them do all the preparations, putting the thing on your head, then frying you, and then actually not dying. I think that's enough. I don't think that person should have to go through their last meal again, all their goodbyes, that walk, and all this. I just think that's too much. I personally think it's too much. So no, I don't think they should have to go through that again. I think they should just if it failed, just keep them in prison the rest of their life.
Christina,
and I agree.
The book that you wanted to discuss?
It was more of a full circle thing, I guess, in chapter 4, where Conover 107. Conover is basically going through a search in C block, and he mentions, or he writes in the book kind of what I feel encompasses the entire thing. He says, let's see, it's in the first paragraph. While everyone knows that prison can warp or distort the personalities of prisoners, we stop to consider how it can do the same to those who work inside. And I think that statement actually encompasses the entire story, or what his purpose was for this experience. Because, initially he wanted to go into it to dig for the truth. And he did find that, but he didn't expose it in a way that was negative. It was exposed in a way where he actually firsthand went through all of these experiences to kind of get the humane vision of what it's like to kind of work in a correctional facility, and interactions that people who actually work inside the prison have to make with other people who work there with them and inmates as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All very good points here. Was there anything particular that you learned from the book, or that you really took away from the book? And with that, I want to start off with you, Tasia. What did you take away from the book?
Oh wow, I took away so much. One of the things in particular that I took away was just the whole aspect of the training he went through to the end of actually experiencing it. As I apply it to my life today, it's like you never know what something is really like until you experience it. And from him going in, he probably didn't expect all of that, what he went through. And like he said, he tried to, with his family, try to separate that from his personal life, but he just couldn't. And that's another thing, some people go into that and they make it their life, so you have to learn when to separate it as well.
Anything else you took away from the book?
And another thing I took away from the book was, as I read the book with Eccles, I saw the prisoner's point of view, and then when I saw the correctional's point of view, I just thought I thought that was amazing to see both point of views that way. And some of the things I didn't expect to see, from the correctional officer, I expected, the treatment of how the prisoners were treated, but the Sing Sing prison, just how complex it was, and, the way that the correctional officer treated themselves by the higher ups. It just seemed like the higher up within the criminal justice you go, like the more power you have, and the lower on the bottom you are, the less power you have.
Okay. Good points. Good things to take away.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you want to go first. I've never done any internships. I'm pretty much just a college student right out of high school that is just kind of trying to make my way through the criminal justice major. But I've learned a lot, but none of it's firsthand. It's all third person, stories that my teachers tell me, to my friends tell me, I used to be really judgmental towards prisoners. They do go through a lot, and I was definitely really judgmental towards correctional officers, strictly because you really don't think, without knowing anything, you think a correctional officer doesn't really go through a whole lot. He moves one prisoner to the next spot. Transportation, whether you work in the psych unit or the visitor room or the box, they really go through a lot. And I've kind of learned, what I'm taking away from the book is no life lesson. I'm just taking away straight knowledge. Because when you think of a correctional officer, they don't really have to go through a whole lot of training to do what they do. They go through academy for 2 months, and was it?
Theirs was 7 or 8 weeks.
7 or 8 weeks.
In Florida now it's 6 months.
6 months, okay. You think, because this was all tracked in 97, I believe, and that kind of leads me to a discussion. In my fall punishment society class taught by Dr. Smikla, he was out one day, but his graduate assistant Vicky had proposed a debate for the class, and the debate was, do you consider correctional officers professionals or not? I had said no. I didn't think that they were. I thought a professional was somebody who had severely studied for something. They had been well educated, well experienced. And I just, for some reason, I didn't think that they were. After reading this book, I see that the struggles that they go through with inmates not wanting to cooperate and their senior officers just almost kind of mentally abusing them. And so now I just I truly believe they are professionals, and it takes I believe not everybody can go into the correctional field and do what they do. I think it takes a lot of hardening their skin, like they were doing in the academy, because you see a lot. You see stabbings, you see your fellow officers getting yelled at and cussed at, and you yourself are getting cussed at, but then you also get to know all these inmates and just really become good friends with them, like Larson or Twitch. So yeah, it's no joke. It's definitely it is a profession, and it is a profession that these people work hard at, and it takes a lot of experience, because I physically couldn't imagine being put at Sing Sing my first day, being a correctional officer, and expect to just kind of go in headstrong. It's hard.
Yeah, from viewpoints as far as life after death, seeing the prisoners' mind's eye view and the correctional officers, it's kind of, it opens your eyes to a lot of the processes of the prison system, and it basically, for me, it's like prison's not something lightly to ever look at, and I think it's a good thing for people outside of the system to kind of understand both sides to it, because not everyone gets it. They all have different points of view, but I feel like if, everyone kind of reads like these two novels, they'll get it. That's what I kind of took away from it, is that, they really do, people really need to understand other people's points of view before they judge exactly what's going on.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I just had one more thing to say about the two viewpoints. It's funny too, because when I was reading Damien Eccles' Life After Death, I felt so bad for the prisoners, because it's kind of something you just do naturally. You always pick good versus evil. So when I was reading Life After Death, Damien Eccles is the good guy, and all these correctional officers who are abusing him and beating the just crap out of him, those are the bad guys. But then I read this book, and the bad guys became the good guys, and I really got to see their point of view, and now they're almost, and I just, like you guys said, I really enjoyed that, both viewpoints. Sorry.
My experience and background encompasses a lot of this stuff already, but there's a main thing that I actually did learn from this book. One of the the things you were talking about, David, was good versus bad, and you see it from different viewpoints. The key thing to remember is that what you may consider bad, depending on the perspective of somebody, in that group, there's always good and there's always bad.
Yes.
Okay? There's bad inmates, there's good inmates, there's bad COs, and there's good COs. I learned that the CO job is a lot harder, or can be a lot harder than what I've seen and what I've heard. But the biggest thing is the toll it takes on the officer by working in a prison. The psychological impact that it has, and this was highlighted in an instance where Conover comes home from work one day after being disrespected by every inmate imaginable, and of course, some fellow correctional officers as well. And he wants to see his children, and his children are young, 3 years and 2 years or something around there, and acting like typical kids, and they're not listening to their father. And it really causes him to break, and the term he uses is a use of force on his son. That's pretty substantial to think about, to where he actually resorted to, using force and losing his cool with his kids because of work. Now, there's other professions where, it gets to the people and it causes them to have familial problems or family problems. And I was in one of those fields, so I kind of understand. But that really should cause society as a whole to pause and evaluate this idea of prison as a massive answer to crime. Do we really want to subject law-abiding citizens and good members of society to such atrocities? Granted, police officers have to be there because they're the ones that are dealing with the stuff initially, but the less people that have to go to prison, the fewer correctional officers we need to staff the prisons, which means the fewer people that are needed to go through such traumatic events. So that's really what I took from this, is a reflection upon society to look at how we want to treat crime and punishment. And I think, with that said, NewJack is a good book. Get it, read it, think about it, and
learn from it.
That is all for tonight. Thank you, and good night.